Well, fire chief told me it's 6. Mr. McGraw, silence your cell phones. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. I will call to order the special meeting of Thursday, January 9th, 2025. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional First People of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Present.
Mr. Pike,
Here.
Ms. Carlson. Here. Mr. Yestad,
Here.
Mr. Mosier,
Here.
Mr. Celine.
Here.
And I haven't heard from Mr. Christensen, so I'm expecting he'll be here. He hasn't told me otherwise.
Great, thank you. Any correspondence or agenda changes this evening? Seeing none, that'll bring it to persons to be heard. This is public participation in any item off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Hello, Assembly members. My name is Jeremy Twaddle. I'm a lifelong resident of Sitka and a resident in the Price Street area. I've come before the Assembly tonight to advocate for the paving of the remainder of Price Street. From where the blacktop currently ends on Price Street, there's approximately 24.4 acres of privately owned property served by this gravel road. This 24.4 acres of land is comprised of 53 commercial and industrial zone lots that directly access off of Price Street. These lots contain a mix of commercial and residential uses. The commercial uses range from retail sales establishments to storage facilities. There are also many small warehouse buildings that rent out shop bays or space to tenants, which also run their small businesses out of these properties, greatly increasing the vehicular traffic and number of inhabitants per lot. In addition to the commercial and residential uses in this area, there are approximately 98 residential dwelling units consisting of manufactured homes, apartments, single-family, and multifamily dwellings. In short, this area has grown up over the past 20 or so years and now contains a thriving community that pays a lot of money in property and sales taxes to the city of Sitka. But that thriving community is still lacking the basic amenities that most other communities of this size in Sitka share, and that is a paved road. This particular stretch of road is plagued with constant maintenance being performed by the city of Sitka, on average multiple times a week, by grading the gravel road to try and keep up with the potholes due to the rain and vehicular traffic. On the flip side, when it's dry out in the summer, the residents are plagued by thick dust clouds from every passing vehicle. This dust is toxic and it's spread by the wind all over the inhabitants of Price Street. A similar problem occurred when the subdivisions were first constructed down Indian River Road. Their road was initially gravel and they suffered the same problems, especially dust. One of the main driving reasons Indian River Road was ultimately paved is because it was determined that the dust posed a health risk for the residents, specifically the threat of silica poisoning. Per OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, granite rock, the rock we most commonly have in Sitka, is comprised of 10 to 40% silica. Constantly grading this road and others breaks down the D1 surfacing into small dust-sized particles that become airborne and spread through the surrounding areas. Now that the community served by Price Street has matured and is doing its part to create substantial revenues for the city of Sitka, I would ask that the city return the favor and pave Price Street. This will improve the quality of life for the residents living, working, and transiting this area, as well as reduce the maintenance costs to the city of Sitka by not having to constantly grade the road. In closing, I also believe Price Street is a prime candidate for paving, given that the underground utilities are relatively new and should have a service life that exceeds that of the new blacktop. Thank you.
Anyone else this evening on persons to be heard? Any item not on tonight's agenda?
Good evening. My name is Nicholas McGraw. 46-year resident of Sitka, Alaska. I work Tuesday evenings, so I haven't been able to stop by and offer up some comments on a few things. So tonight worked out just right for me. I want to thank the Assembly for their time that they put into to volunteer for a lot of things and research a lot of things. And I also want to thank the streets crew that's been doing the cleanup by Swan Lake. It's looking really well. One thing I would offer up is they haven't been using any flaggers, and blocking one lane of traffic there kind of makes it a little inconvenient for traffic flows. I wanted to offer some comments on the talk of crosswalks out front here. You can put in 5 crosswalks, but if there's nobody monitoring them or people being fined or anything like that, people are going to cross where they're going to cross. And the worst spot that people are crossing is right on the corner here because it's a blind corner. And there's absolutely no chance there's going to be a crosswalk put there for obvious reasons. So a suggestion I would say, maybe look at like the bollards with the ropes like Alaska Airlines has for their temporary lines for passengers getting on the planes. Something along here maybe to help out. Could be hire some young people or something like that say, please use crosswalks. Please don't cross here. Please use crosswalks. That could be I think maybe it could be some funds that cruise ship wouldn't mind giving or using for that. Another thing with possible cruise ship money, maybe run some power to the dock or something like that. I know that's a whole ball of wax, but if we could run power to the cruise ships, then of course that would lessen the carbon footprint, and of course it would benefit them as well, because they could obviously work on their generators and that type of stuff while they're down at the time for the cruise ships. Sorry, I can't see that. And that's all I have for this time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. There's a button on the microphone right in front of you on the very bottom.
Good
Perfect.
evening. My name is Tyler Cropley, born and raised here in Sitka, superintendent for Seacon. We do a lot of paving throughout Southeast Alaska. Last summer, we worked hand in hand with Public Works, and we were able to utilize a lot of the tourist money to repair a lot of streets around town in the neighborhoods, well out of the way of what the tourists use, right, for our community. I worked with Ron Vincent. We put a lot of time and effort into trying to get the maximum amount of asphalt and repair area that we could for the city of Sitka at the best price that we could provide. I encourage you guys to think about building a program, a maintenance program. You'll see cities of Juneau, Ketchikan, they'll have an area-wide program every year that goes out to bid. They fix a lot of their roads. I would encourage you to look into that, and if there's anything that I can do to help with that, we'd be happy to do that. So thank you.
Anybody else on persons to be heard? Seeing none, that'll bring us to our new business this evening. We're here to talk about the general fund budget. John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is kind of the kickoff of our fiscal year 26 municipal budget process. Bit of a compressed schedule this year, but overall the same as we've done in previous years. So this is kind of the first meeting where we seek assembly guidance after we've done a lot of the staff work already from the resource proposals that have been submitted from staff. We've presented those for your input, and if there's any other guidance that you'd like to provide to us that we can build into our draft budget before we bring that back to the assembly. The hope for tonight is just to have a healthy discussion on what if we need to change any directions or if there's any specific projects you'd like us to focus on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa and we can start the presentation.
Yeah, we don't have a resource proposal for the microphone, so. But so tonight we're focusing on anything new. So this is really, looking at specific fixed assets that we bring to you that aren't just a replacement of something we need to maintain our current level of service. So we're doing that for the general fund as well as the internal service funds. We'll do the exact same thing for enterprise funds later. And then we'll be talking about those new things and also what the rate assumptions will be to craft those budgets. So we're starting here. We'll put together the whole general fund, get that to you, and then discuss that, and then the enterprise funds. So I wanted to start with focusing on some of the highlights. We've been doing this process for the last few years. And out of that, we've had a lot of kind of new exciting things happen. So we have our award-winning Parks and Recreation program that was added in a few years ago. That program is also making some of our existing public facilities more accessible to the community and bringing in some revenue for the use of those facilities. The sustainability coordinator, I meant to get an exact number from her. I'm pretty sure it's well over 5 million. But she has been busy getting grants that support many different areas of our operations. We've also reopened the Blatchley swimming pool to the public. And then this year, decision made during our last budget process, we took on the maintenance and management of our school buildings, which I think is going to be very beneficial to the long-term stability of those buildings. We're also moving toward transitioning to electric vehicles where it's appropriate. We really haven't gotten to see our improvements in snow and ice management this year, but we have made good investments in that. And I think once we get more snow and ice, we might actually see that. Okay, sorry. And then just our overall staffing and our systems, which are all tied to retention of staff, recruitment of staff, our HRIS system, the recruitment piece is up and running. I know in my department, I was very excited. At our department head meeting today, I let them know that we are getting enough candidates for an open position that it says it's hot. So I was very excited about that. And then really working on succession planning as well. So those are all items that have come out of this process where requests were presented to the assembly tied to the strategic plan. So just to quickly go over the budget process, as John said, this is every year we're refining our process a little bit. But overall, this process is very similar to last year. So we have a zero-based budget. We asked everyone to kind of start from scratch. What do you need this year to provide your services? We're risk scoring for capital projects. So really focusing on that on next Thursday with the school board and assembly meeting, you'll get a chance to see how we've done that for our school buildings. And I think, that's been a really great process with those buildings, but it's an ongoing process as well. So any significant change in the level of service being provided to the community, whether it's an increase or a decrease, which we don't have any decreases this year, are presented with a resource proposal. Those resource proposals were reviewed internally. You will see a few in here that were not recommended, but we still wanted to let you see what was proposed. There were a few that we reviewed and really felt, no, this is core operations. You can't keep doing what you're doing now if you don't have this. And so those we did not share, but those will be coming forward in our regular budget. So they'll be included in there. Everything is tied to strategic goals. And as John said, the process is a little bit condensed this year. It's not going to really impact the assembly. I think the work on our end is going to be more condensed. But we have this meeting, our meeting on the 16th with the school board. After that, our next meeting will be February 7th to go over the general fund budget. Oh no, sorry, not February 7th. The 30th. That's to get feedback for the enterprise funds and feedback on the rates. One thing to throw out on this one, we have a number of people who will be absent. So we're thinking it might be better to move that to Tuesday, February 4th or Thursday, February 6th. So maybe we can revisit that at the end and see if that might work better. But then we have one meeting to go over the general fund, which is usually a fairly in-depth meeting. And then our final meeting goes over enterprise, internal service, and special revenue funds. And then we should have that final budget published. It can be passed as early as the assembly wants, or it can wait. It has to be passed the latest possible to meet the code requirement would be having first reading May 7th and second reading June 10th. So just a snapshot. First of all, this year, there's a little bit of staff restructuring in here. I think we end up with a 0.2 FTE increase overall to achieve that restructuring. But other than that, there are no new FTEs. There will be the implementation of the compensation study that will we will not have that detail in time to include it in the budget, but that's something the assembly will need to keep in mind when we're looking at our bottom line. Hopefully we'll start to get more of an idea of what that will be, but that will be pending. There are a few areas that we're requesting increases in temp labor. Temp, particularly seasonal labor, can be a very valuable asset. Just to throw up here, this is just the same comparison I shared with you last year. I just added what are, so the dark column is the kind of where we are in terms of staff per community member. And that's with our actual staffing. The great news is that our vacancy rate is significantly down from where it is last year. So I think overall, it's great for the community and great for staff.
I'd also like to add to, and I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead in the conversation. All of our bargaining unit contracts expire at the end of the current fiscal year. And we expect that we'll be doing renegotiations this spring. And we'll have to factor that in once we know more information going into July 1st.
And we'll certainly share. Right now, we do not yet have our CPI increase. The one that we use for staffing is published next week. So we'll get that, and that will probably be our baseline for what is included in staffing budget for this initial draft. So overall, the net increase for the general fund from these resource proposals is just a bit over $1 million. That is proposals that are not offset by direct revenue. We also have the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund that they go out from the general fund, but it's a net zero impact because we have funding coming in from the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund. It will be exactly the same way for the school funding. The school board did approve the proposed capital for next year, and we'll talk more about that again on Thursday. I'm going to run through some scenarios because we do have some really big projects, not very far off for the school. So it's going to be very important to consider how to use those funds from the seasonal sales tax, because as much as it's wonderful to have that source, when you start looking at the needs, they're not, they seem smaller than otherwise. And then again, we have the union negotiations and comp study. So those will have a placeholder there for those increases. And then just looking ahead, right now for school funding, which is our biggest expense, our maximum allowable contribution is just slightly down from the FY25 number. So that's where we'll be kind of starting out this process. We've got a lot of federal funding opportunities that are still available, but I think staff is stretched thin in terms of going after grants and also being able to implement them in timeframes that are proposed. So we're having to be strategic and selective in pursuing federal funding, but we certainly still are.
Want to add to that one. I know I've said it before, but right now we're actively managing over $150 million in grant funding. That takes a lot of work from our finance staff for a lot of major projects. So the Marine Service Center seawall, we've got the airport, we've got the seaplane base. What other ones am I forgetting? We've got some ETIP grant projects going on in the electric department. So they take a lot of time to meet those grant requirements. So we're very selective and strategic on what we're selecting for future grant opportunities.
And then just a note that with our vacancy rate down and sales tax really leveling off, we're not expecting the same generous levels of transfer to the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund. We're not expecting this year, and it's still early. We haven't closed the second quarter yet, but we're not expecting the same levels to go into the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund. The amount we've transferred in the past few years is really, that kind of perfect amount to meet at least the needs as we know them now. There's still a lot of work happening with the condition assessment. So that's going to be something that needs to be considered. And then tied to that, with my initial projections for sales tax, which is our primary revenue source, I have to assume a fairly conservative number for April to June of 2026. Depending on what happens with the petition, regardless, I would be presenting a pretty flat budget. But right now, I have a placeholder that kind of puts us more at 2022 levels. So we'll see how that goes. But right now, that's where I'm starting from. And you'll certainly have a chance when we go through the general fund. I will go through those assumptions, and the assembly can give me guidance there. So again, we are, everything here is tied to our strategic plan, which is tied to our values. This is a living document. We all use this, and it's great that we're getting it updated every year so it stays fresh. And I have tried very hard to put these in order, so hopefully I achieve that. But we'll go through each one. I'll just introduce each one. Feel free to ask questions. If I can answer it, I will. Otherwise, we have, I think, most people who submitted them in the room tonight. So the first, and just to note here, I have a column for each of these that is the total appropriation. And then what the impact to the general fund is. So for this first one, the safe donation, we've been giving $50,000 for a very long time. So in this case, because the increase is 50,000, that's what I have as the impact to the general fund. So our first one is increasing the funding level for the safe donation. Again, that one's been flat. I believe this one was submitted by an assembly member, so if anyone wants to speak to that, feel free. Was that?
Yeah, they asked me to put that in and but the information came from SAFE. Essentially, I guess I view them as payment for services. They make life easier in a lot of ways for the police department. Because if they have a domestic violence incident, there's someplace for the family to go where they're safe. I think the argument can be made that they save us a huge amount of money and because there's a lot of arrests that don't happen because of them. And that every time we arrest somebody, there's court time, there's staff time, there's we don't pay for the courts, but we sure pay to send people to them. Not to mention, they also do a lot of, since we started funding them, they also now provide food for families, emergency shelter. So they tick a lot of points in the strategic plan. And they've been flat since, I'm not sure when we started exactly, it was around 15 years ago, 15, or maybe even more than that. They also are losing a lot of some of their funding. So in order to keep going, so again, I was happy to forward it on for them to help them get into the request in, and I think it's time.
And as we go through these, I will, unless I hear a very clear direction opposite, these would be in the initial draft budget. Just so if there's anything that someone does not want in the budget, definitely speak up. It can be done through motion. We don't have to have a motion because this isn't a budget yet. We can also do it through consensus. But if we just go through and everyone's kind of okay, I'll assume that the assembly would like to see that item in the initial draft of the general fund or internal service fund budget. Okay, so moving on, this next item, and I apologize in the initial copies that I sent out. This one was originally submitted at 150,000. The review team reduced it to 50,000. So the recommendation here is to push this item forward. And these are just additional resources to help us evaluate the commercial land use plan for implementation in FY26. So putting 50,000 toward that.
John, can we talk about this one for a second? I guess I'm having a hard time spending additional money on a plan that came forward to us for approval already. Because if it came forward to us for approval, that means it was done. But this is saying that it's not done. Do you have any additional clarification on this that might allow me to go forward with it?
Sure. And I'll ask if Amy can come up here and offer some assistance as well. But based on a lot of the feedback that was presented during the first iteration of the commercial land use plan, trying to further analyze some of the concerns that were brought forward, it's going to require some more work to try to dial in those numbers a little bit more. And I think we'll need some support and some research and some of the research aspects of that. But Amy, if you have some further clarification.
In short, Amy Ainsley, Planning Community Development Director. In short, the version of the plan that we brought forward to you, we still stand behind, and it's a product that we're proud of. But it wasn't passed. It seemed like there was a concern from the assembly. It seemed like there was concern from, from the operators. And so we sort of put this in here as, not to say that we necessarily believe that this additional funding is needed, but given the direction of the plan and the conversation around it, if more detailed work was to be required at the level that was being discussed, then we needed more resources to accomplish that.
I kind of with Stephen on this one. I mean, for me personally, the only I thought we were within tweaking range, I guess I'd call it that. And what I was hearing mostly was that if we delayed the implementation by a year so that people could get used to it, I think that was the biggest issue. But the bulk of the plan seemed pretty, I mean, and with tweaking, and we talked about possibly changing some of the numbers a little bit. But I think the whole reason why we didn't just go ahead and delay it a year was because of Baranoff. And so I guess, I mean, I thought we were at the tweaking stage and not rewrite stage. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other people had a different feeling on that.
I disagree. I think, listening to what Amy has to say, I don't think they're planning on just spending this right away on anything specific, but, I personally like the plan, but, respectable of the assembly, and, I did vote to postpone, for discussion, but this is not an easy thing to do, what they put together and what they're planning on trying to do. If there's from my perspective, they just want to have that money available. And if they don't need to use it, they don't need to use it. Goes back into the general fund. But this could help them with any type of studies or anything like that needs to be done to make sure that this gets approved next year when it comes to, or when it next comes to us. So I'm in favor of this. I think it's important. I think the commercial recreational land use plan is extremely important to the people of Sitka. Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, I wanted to add, I'm there. If the assembly is largely happy with the plan the way it is, that's fantastic news to me. If this is not something we want to move forward with on the funding, but there's a little bit between the timing of when we had that discussion and when we needed to turn these resource proposals in. And some of the, between some of the comments, some at the assembly a little bit, some that were being submitted through public comment about a call for additional data and research and not really having things landed for us as staff when we needed to turn these in. We were anticipating that, hey, if the ask is going to be go back and revisit, let's do a more detailed data scrub and data collection and analysis, then that's where we needed more resources for it. And so that's kind of the hard part for us, is that having that be up in the air, we wanted to try to make sure that we had some resource available to address that kind of uncertainty in terms of what direction we were going to go.
I guess I just have a process question for the assembly as a whole, and Sarah perhaps, and certainly John. So, I mean, as I understand it, this proposal is still on the table, right? We just postponed it. We didn't withdraw it. Are you as the sponsor withdrawing this proposal from the assembly's review at this point in time? Because at this point, it's coming back at the end of January, correct?
The commercial land use plan or the ordinance enacting the.
You tell me. I mean, I guess.
No,
Yeah.
No, we have a change of plan. Amy, how about you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I do believe that we had some communications about this before the holidays. So I'm hoping this is not a surprise to anybody. But we did send a statement. We issued a statement that we're submitting a revised ordinance that it delays the implementation date. With the decision to postpone the consideration on the ordinance and the plan to the end of January, we were looking at best, being able to turn out permits by early to mid-April, and that's already the start of the season. This was, after kind of having the evening to think about that and going into, in the next morning, I was like, that's not going to be possible for staff. That's an impossible position to be putting operators in. And so we decided to change to submit a replacement ordinance for that. So we're looking at a full year out from implementation at this point. And that was also part of the reason around this resource proposal is that, since we're delaying implementation for a full year, is there going to be a request for my department to revisit the plan and to do more intensive study or research or that sort of thing?
And I read all that you said there. I mean, I understand exactly where we're standing on this. And my question still stands. I think the Assembly was not walking away from this plan. And we particularly were concerned about the impact on Baranof Warm Springs by delaying it by a year. So I didn't walk away from our last meeting thinking we were ready to just walk away from the whole thing. And so I guess this may not be the venue for having this conversation, but I don't remember us doing that. So that's why I was asking if you're withdrawing the plan. That's a different thing. As a sponsor, you can certainly do that. But as far as the Assembly is concerned, we didn't walk away from that process. So I guess that's my question. I understood exactly what you were saying, and I was even heard some of the conversation after that meeting about concerns about the operators, and I understand that. But, I don't want to leave Baranof Warm Springs for another year either, so.
I think to your earlier comment, I think that part of it is a conversation for probably for next Tuesday's meeting. And so, no, it's not our intent to withdraw the plan altogether. But again, when we were turning in resource proposals, not having a really kind of firm sense of the level of satisfaction with the plan and what else might needed to be done, our department has put in the amount of time that we put into doing the plan this year, I cannot do again next year with just the staff that we have. It's just too much work to try to go through that effort again. And so if there was a desire to look at this in a more detailed way or have more study, I need more resource for that. If I'm hearing that you're not feeling that way about the plan, that's great news, and you're welcome to, of course, as always, but if, there's not going to be any hurt feelings on our part if you don't want to approve this RP.
If I could just make an observation, I think we're gonna know whether or not we're gonna need this before we pass the budget, because it's all in the next few meetings. And we can leave it there for now, because we're gonna know well before May whether or not we need this. It falls apart in the next meeting, and we're like, okay, we've got to start over, then we know we need it. So I'm not really gonna fight about this right now, because this is one of those times where, we'll know before, and we can always pull it. If we pass it and we're good, and then we just pull it to the next meeting.
Yeah, I think at this point, I kind of agree with Tor here. I feel like maybe we don't need to go this far with the plan, but at this point, Amy, is this going to come back up to the Parks and Rec Committee? Or is it just going to come back to the Assembly for any tweaks that you may make to the plan?
Can I give that some thought, and can we have, and not to,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be evasive, but could we have that conversation because I just don't want to, we're only at the second one, and I'm realizing how much
Yeah.
time we're taking on this. And
Yeah,
I
no
just
problem.
want to be, moving through and not.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
My take on this one is it's not needed, but we do need to put some money aside for general studying of our tourism industry to directly get at the words here on 1.3. Review the impacts of tourism and benefits of tourism, and develop policies that prioritize the quality of life for Sickens. The land use plan is one aspect of that, but we have a whole industry here that we need to research. I think money for that is better used.
I guess for myself at this point, being the one that started the line of questioning, to me, this could have come up as a supplemental, if we needed to, if we do go down that path. That's kind of the point that I'm at right now. However, since we're all just seeing this and all just digesting this right now, we can go forward with it for now. But it is some low hanging fruit on my chopping block when we get there. I don't know how all these resource proposals play into our budget, what effect it has on it. So we're still learning through this process, so. Anything else for Amy on this one? Thank you, Amy. Thank you, John.
Okay, so I am generally hearing that this one might be up for consideration later, but it will go in, this 50,000 will go into the initial draft. So our last item under goal 1, quality of life, is an increase. Again, this is similar to the SAFE funding where there's a level of funding already, and this is a $50,000 increase to the Southeast Economic Development Association.
If anyone has questions, I am the liaison to CETA right now and can answer them, but I think
Yeah.
the memo laid it out pretty well.
Oh, yeah, could you just, actually, never mind.
Thank you.
I have a question. With this plus the money we give them to operate GPIP, what's the total we give that organization at the moment?
I believe we give them 90 to operate GPIP.
90,000 for the contract to operate GPIP. And the funding for CETA is for just general economic development for the entire city and borough, separated from GPIP work.
So 90 plus 70 is where we're currently at.
Correct.
And
Just one's a contract and one's a
yeah,
financial donation.
I get you. Yeah, I'm.
All right, so we'll include this in our initial draft. Moving on, we only have one item. And, keep in mind, we do have some items, more items in some of these for our enterprise funds. This, for the general fund, we have just this one item. So this is a trip to celebrate, I believe it was the 50-year anniversary of the sister city relationship with Nomura, Japan.
I put this one very low on the priority list. And I threw it out there for consideration because our sister city did reach out. They visited us actually quite a few times. They take the relationship very seriously. And we have received an invite from them to travel to their city to celebrate that relationship. But I didn't feel right not at least presenting the idea for consideration since we were asked to attend.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so we will move on. Goal 3, we do not have any general fund proposals, but I would like to note in some cases we have to pick a goal, and there are a number throughout this presentation that I think you could probably argue they could fall under here, but they just happen to be under another one. So this is obviously our most significant, as it was last year, and we know, probably because you've heard me be a broken record about it for years, how behind we are on our infrastructure. So we'll just go through these. I'll go through them fairly quickly. Stop me if you have any questions or if any discussion is desired on any of these. So this first item is a focus on revitalizing the athletic fields. So a lot of this is really about the surfacing of those athletic fields, and it's really for the supplies to do that. So that's $50,000. Our next item.
John,
and
I
we-
guess I do have a question, starting with this one, and it kind of overlaps on a lot of these. And I think this one identifies it the best, but it seems as if that this is just a day-to-day operation. You know, revitalizing the fields comes up within grounds maintenance under Public Works, and I'm just not sure why a lot of these came forward as a resource proposal when it seems to me that is the tasking of that department.
I would say it's because we start to cross that line where normal routine maintenance is not keeping up with just the needs of the facility. Right now, we are, I mean, not this one exactly, but for example, at Moeller Field, we do maintenance to the nets and the fences and the backstops, but at a certain point, we get to the point where they just flat out need replacing, and that's what we're facing with some of the surfacing on the athletic fields. We can do the routine maintenance to it, but there's a substantial amount of materials and some heavier level work that's going to need to go into it to get those revitalized.
I think this is one where we can keep going along with the kind of stop gap, filling a pothole here or there on the fields. This is a more substantial, it's going to give us a bit more life out of the asset.
I gotta say, I'm with Stephen on this one. I think we need to do this, but it just seems like this should be in the regular. I mean, I guess you can make the argument, but I mean, putting more sand and gravel down that strikes me as maintenance. And, maybe it's a little bigger maintenance, but, some of these things in here are obvious. It's a new thing. But when I was reading through these, that's honestly why I was late. I left my iPad back in my office because I was reading these this afternoon. I had to run back and grab it. Yeah, I mean, like buying a new lawnmower, then don't we do that on a regular basis? I mean, that's it just doesn't strike me as like I think of these when in the budget time is, oh, yeah, this is a new thing, and I guess.
And we had to make a lot of calls, and we do encourage our staff to submit resource proposals when in doubt. In terms of the vehicles, vehicles are always something the assembly has wanted to weigh in. Certainly some of them, if it's a new addition to the fleet, those would come forward. We can certainly take, the feedback and if we, all of the replacement vehicles here are ones that have met the requirements under our plan. But there also are, because of the recent pretty drastic increase in cost of vehicles, most of these do not have a full sinking fund. So there is an overall pretty significant impact to the general fund. So that's why those ones are in here.
I'm kind of with Tor and Stephen on this one. I guess maybe the point I would make is how come he doesn't have a budget for this already? And I guess, if what you're asking is whether the assembly wants to up the ground maintenance budget so they can take care of some of these things, they don't have to come all the way to us. Is that a question that you need to answer to? So why is this not already in his budget, I guess? Is kind of my question, and that's where it comes to for me with this one. Is it not necessary? I mean, I trust that he will make a good decision to use the funds we give him to do the most important things for the city. So, I mean, is it necessary to bring it all the way up here, I guess, and that's my question.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and I think a lot of this too is to provide some transparency for the community as well. A status quo budget, if we just see it inflate every year and don't necessarily outline exactly what we plan on doing with the inflated funds, I at least want to be able to outline that these were brought forward as concerns for this year. And yes, our operating budget may be going up a bit, but being able to lay that out for everyone to hear. And if the assembly does have any strong feelings either way. The alternative would be, hey, why did the Parks and Grounds maintenance go up by, $200,000 this year? And then having to list that off, I just wanted to be able to show everyone why the increases for the next year.
Okay, so our next item is replacing one of our city hall vehicles, which has met the end of its life according to our matrix. The next one is to re-sign and replace interpretive signs along the Crescent Harbor Seawalk. Those are now outdated. And some of these, you'll notice there are priorities on here because these are not critical to our operations. They're not a life safety issue. Those were prioritized as low.
Are we planning on using? I know it's the CPIP, but I know that's not.
CPV,
Yeah,
that it's a gray area there. We might be able to fund part of it. But they're not just used by cruise passengers, so it would probably need to be shared either with general fund, potentially visitor enhancement fund.
I'd like to see 75% from CPV and 25% from visitor enhancement.
And then this is one, I think it's a great spot to kind of include a little project of mine that I've wanted for a while, and kind of been figuring out a way to do it. But the whale and the sea lion that are along there, I happen to have a 5-year-old who now uses these things, so I see them more than some other assets in town. But the cement is still good, just the epoxy paint on them is very worn. So I think it'd be nice if we could add, it's probably $2,000 to this in order to repaint those as well. They're so popular, they even have their own Google page, I found out recently. They are an attraction within the municipality, and they have reviews on them as well. So I would like it. It's kind of a personal little project that I wanted to see happen before my time here was done. But I understand the assembly may not want that as a whole.
All right. And our next item is replacing 4 Kim Sham ball field scoreboards. This one was placed as low, primarily thinking that there might be an opportunity for donation. In the past, we have had, I believe, some of this kind of athletic equipment donated. And then we have the Tom Young cabin envelope improvements.
I'd like to interrupt and go back to replacing City Hall vehicle number 458. Who uses that vehicle?
That is used by, the construction inspectors, so engineers who need to run out to the construction site. Any city hall staff who have to go run to a meeting or go on site, our building department, our assessing department.
So it's shared amongst all, including our person that is our tourism manager.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Our next item is actually, this is a fixed asset. We don't need any more money. The funding for this was transferred back in 2022 into the central garage, so it will be coming out of the central garage fund, but it's a placeholder in there. We were supposed to get 2 E-Transit vans because of what was going on with the price. We thought we could only afford 1 at the time, and so we bought 1. But when all of the dust settled, we had enough left over to buy a second, so. The next item was one that came to you last year, and it wasn't urgent last year. It's a bit more urgent this year. Another year has passed, and so this is replacing our streets dump truck. So that would require a transfer of $75,584 from the general fund. And our next item is replacing, under the MOU, the staff that came over from the school district. They had a number of vehicles that they used. We're using those vehicles for now. A number of those vehicles are quite old at the end of life. This is replacing one of those vehicles. So this is a full-on addition to the fleet. It's replacing a vehicle that we're, at least for now, borrowing from the school district. And the next one is replacing vehicle 455, a police cruiser. So that's going to require an additional transfer to the general fund, or from the general fund, of 71,000. We are, at one point, our police vehicles were only getting 3 years of useful life before they needed to be replaced. But over the past number of years, that fleet has grown a bit, and we are getting quite a bit more time out of our police cruisers. I think so.
I believe this is the one that's being replaced with the Lightning, the electric truck.
Okay. The next one is an addition to our fleet. So it's another Walker mower. It's not replacing an existing one, but it's going to give the crews more flexibility when one of the other ones is out of service. We next have a fire hall heater replacement, which it's not replacing in kind. The current heater is tied to the boiler. So this one is separating it out and being run from electric. The next item is a capital project. We have $150,000 appropriated to deal with some of the cedar trim and lamb beam refinishing in this building. This is just adding 25,000. It's taken us a while to get to it, and costs have increased. The next one is the Moeller ball field backstop and netting replacement. Next, we have Moeller Park cameras. And the idea of this one is to help better manage Moeller Park. And the next one is a pretty significant item. The total appropriation would be $3 million. It would be split. We already have funding for this project, so the general fund would need to add another 581,000. But this project at this point would be contingent on the state contributing their share of the funding, which I believe their share is 60%. Because it's a 60-40 split for that building.
This one's always been very challenging to coordinate with that city-state agreement in that building. You might remember recently that court was moved over here into this room while they have HVAC issues that led to some mold in the building. So I think there's some potentially urgency on their part to address the HVAC issues. And if we can get this project funded and sync up with them on that project, then perhaps we can get the HVAC issues solved in that building.
Question, have you had any indication from the state of their desire to partner with us?
I've not had that discussion with them yet, but that will take place.
Okay.
John, how close are we to using refrigeration skills that are currently working in the city? Are we close at all to having our own refrigeration guy like Dennis rebuilding vehicles?
In building maintenance right now, we don't have a refrigeration qualified individual.
What do you mean qualified as far as, because that's really, I've been talking with you about this forever and just looking at this, I can't accept these numbers. And I'm coming a 4-engine run on this. We really need to get a refrigeration department. And I'm even questioning the bids on some of these numbers and just coming up, I can't believe we don't have a refrigeration department. We found that out too at AML, that all the cities are really looking to have refrigeration skills in the city.
I have a question. This is the kind of thing that should be on here. My question is a little bit different. It's on the same line. So is that assuming the state ponies up, which big assumption, is that building even worth putting money into? I mean, that's the real question. I mean, if we redo the whole HVAC system, I mean, that's just one of the many problems with that building. And is that building really salvageable? And if we have to, especially if we have to keep fighting with the state to fund it.
There's a lot of moving parts there, as you're likely aware. That shared agreement in that building does make it challenging on our legislative priorities. At least since I've been here, a new police department building has been on the legislative priorities list. And we have that discussion every time a project pops up in that building. But until we have a solid solution for the future of a police department building, we're getting to the point where it's becoming fairly critical on addressing some of these things like HVAC. We've got a lot of roof leaks and some other issues in the building. So yes, ideally, I'd like to focus on a new location for the police department, but I don't know how successful we're going to be there given the cost. Last estimates, and I'm sure they're well inflated, was a 2019 study that said a new building would cost over $20 million. And that was before we even had a location chosen for it.
The mold is really worth talking about because when all the HVAC was ripped out of Blatchley, that was a big mold consideration. And the borough had spent like 70 grand rechanging carpets because teachers had claimed of volatile organic compounds blurring up their eyes and stuff. And so the whole duct cleaning aspect, all that stuff was ripped out. And then the heat pumps that were so famous got put in. And an industrial hygienist is really the only person that can tell you about mold. I'm a certified mold remediator, and our common aspergillus black mold here, you can get lawyers that'll argue out in court that it's, hazardous, and it's not. And that's like there's a lot more to it than just saying there's mold.
Question
Yes,
for you.
my position is, I kind of agree with what John's saying. I agree, we do need a bigger, like a brand new building and everything like that. But in the meantime, I mean, they had to come over here to have court because it was unsafe. So we have to get that done.
Thank you. We spent 300,000 last year on a roof replacement to that building. Is that correct?
We haven't spent it yet, and I don't think we've gotten any commitment. That was, again, another one contingent on state commitment of funding to that, which I don't believe we have yet.
Okay. My reading of that agreement, it was an MOU, was kind of more condo association like. My reading is that we just send them an invoice at the end. Is that not the process?
It's the process for our day-to-day operations, for utilities, but for the bigger things, that's always been kind of separate and agreed to beforehand because they have to have a budget for that.
Okay. Was the mold near the roof?
Connor Dunlap, maintenance superintendent. I'm sure you saw my name on a lot of resource proposals. So the city state building, the concerns that exist in that building from the staff, mainly the state employees, have been ongoing for years, mostly related to HVAC. The most recent concerns, there were reports that people were smelling mold, that they were getting headaches, and they decided that they didn't want to work in the building until it was checked. The state performed an air quality test, which showed no concern. We have also done visual inspections. We've gone and looked at ducting, looked above ceiling tiles. We don't see anything that's of major concern. That being said, there is water infiltration from the roof. And as has been stated, the HVAC system is original to the building, 1974. And there's been some modifications made to that through the years. I believe in the 90s, there was a partial redesign, kind of restructuring of some of the state spaces, but largely the system has gone untouched and has not been updated since its origin. So yeah, I just wanted to speak to that because we've been dealing with it a lot over in the maintenance department with these concerns of mold, and I just want to get that out on the table that there's not, at this point, there's not confirmed cases of mold in the building.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, because we kind of did jump on an assumption there. So I appreciate that, clearing that up. Are we the leaders of all projects at the city state building? Is that how it's structured?
Yes, we do manage the operations of that building.
So what else is next? If it takes 5 to 7 years to get the state on board with the project, what else should we be thinking about and talking about in advance of it coming to the assembly? Can that get coordinated before this step right here?
And I think as we work on our condition assessments, we will get more granularity around that. Elements of all of the buildings will be put into the risk assessment.
And so we're looking at numbers here, 3 million. Is that our half, or is that the total project that we expect to get some?
That's the total project. So our piece of that is just a bit over $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
I want to indulge just once, and I told you, so when we built the fire hall, I tried really hard to make it a public safety building where we would have the fire and police in the same building in a bigger building. And couldn't get traction, and it would have cost us a fraction of it, and we would have been out of that building. So I get to say it once, even though nobody was here then, but we would be having a very different conversation then.
So overall, I tend to agree, the life expectancy of this building has me concerned for sure. But I think an interesting note potentially for long-term of that building, if the state does pull the courthouse out and moves to Stratton Library, I think there's less opportunity for us to recoup a 66% funding share for this. And opening up more space potentially for municipal services, whatever that may be. So I think I'm not excited to do this, but I think this is the more opportune time than later down the road when the courthouse pulls out. If the courthouse pulls out.
One more thing on the project cover sheet. It says police department HVAC. So this isn't just renovating the HVAC system in the first floor back bottom half. It's the whole building. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. Our next item is on here, even though we don't have any request from the general fund, is just to put that out there. So this one, the general fund portion of this project is fully funded. We're working toward, you'll see with the enterprise funds that we'll have, the plan is to put $1 million in from electric. And then there's a request for 2.5 million from both water and wastewater. But the intent for this fiscal year is to start with a smaller amount from both water and wastewater and really get a good sense of how that infrastructure looks. Right now, it has not been, we haven't had repeat failures the way we do on some other infrastructure. This project is really being driven by the storm drains. So we've been putting money aside in this one, and I just wanted to make sure that the assembly has an update on where that is. We're getting a lot closer to having that fully funded and moving forward.
And what portion of that is coming from CPV or visitor enhancement, and do you have a recommendation?
There is a small amount in this from CPV, kind of around the crosswalks. That may be reevaluated as the design gets further finalized. But this was one big funding source for this was the donation from Norwegian Cruise Lines that went 100% into this project. And then we've just been putting some aside each year into it.
Does the assembly have any interest in looking at funding from our CPV or visitor enhancement fund for this project?
I guess my thought is, well, by the way, I think it's great that we're moving in this direction. It's my kind of understanding that the staff are constantly and always looking at opportunities to augment the resources that we need by looking at CPV or visit enhancement. If it's possible, that would be great, but if it's not, let's put it in there. Let's get it done.
Okay, so I'll look at that. I'll have a chat with the engineers on that and kind of see where we are. That it might be kind of a next budget cycle conversation, but we'll make sure that we have that flag to have that conversation.
And this, I think at this point, is no longer a paving project. It's a improvements project. It's much more than that. And I think that that project title confuses people. So if there could be a refresh and an expansion of the services, it's way beyond
That's
paving.
a very good note. Now, that's been there for probably a decade, so.
Yep.
So our next item is another HVAC one. That's replacing the controls at the animal shelter, which are quite updated and creating quite a maintenance burden on our building maintenance staff. Our next item is improvements to the cross trail drainage. And so it's more than just fixing things that have washed out. It's actually improving some areas that need that. So that should extend the life of that area of the trail. And we do the funding that funded the entire cross trail. We are required to keep up those trails in perpetuity. Our next item is kind of some deferred improvements that have been identified at the Blatchley Pool. So with us getting more involved with the pool, we've identified a number of items that need improvements. And it should cut down again on staff maintenance time. The next item, as we are slowly electrifying our fleet, we need EV charging locations. So we were able to get some through the EECBG funding, kind of get some work done there. But we do need more of those to make sure that we can charge our fleet and have our vehicles available when we need them. This one would be charged to the central garage fund, and that expense would be allocated out among the other funds. So it kind of hit evenly. So while you would have 50,000 going out from central garage, there will be revenue offsetting from across the organization.
Melissa, did we miss the
Oh,
Catlin Avenue?
Sorry. So Catlin, the goal here is, to get the project, kind of keep infusing funding into the project so we can keep moving ahead with design. We want to get the design to a point where, grant funding is more likely. We do feel that this project is pretty prime for grant funding. This one, we also have, a pretty significant need from electric and from water and wastewater. We'll probably be looking at DEC low-interest loans for the water wastewater side of it, depending on what happens with Lincoln Street. If we don't need as much funding on Lincoln Street, we might be able to cover it with working capital, but we're still we've got more information to collect here, but we want to keep moving forward on all of these projects.
On that topic, but it's not actually in this packet, I'm looking at the mid to long range capital improvement plan. And it also mentions Lincoln Street from Jeff Davis to Lake, so the kind of the other half here. If our funding isn't, there for Catlin and Lincoln, the downtown portion of it, will the other section of Lincoln Street get pushed off, or what's the kind of phasing there for this kind of network?
And I don't
Mhm.
recall off the top of my head exactly where things fall. These two, I believe, are higher on the risk matrix.
Mhm.
So once these are funded, we'll start funding others lower down on there.
Okay.
And we are, I should note that, we have some capital here. Those are kind of the more urgent. We know these need to go forward. We do have more funding than we've requested, in, these resource proposals in the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund, about 2.5 million. So the engineering team and asset management team are still working on getting that all up to date, and we're going to see how far down that matrix we can get with that funding.
Great. The Safe Streets for All grant was mentioned in this product cover sheet. Is that, it says design is going to come through that process for all three of these projects? Lincoln Street, downtown Catlin, and the extension towards Jeff Davis?
The Safe Streets for All grant, and yeah, it's, right now we're in the, I would almost call it a condition assessment, kind of a planning phase. That's the follow-on to having that first part of the Safe Streets for All grant project completed. Otherwise, we're not really able to apply for follow-on phases of that grant program until that first step is done. So we're still working on that first overall inventory and condition assessment of our streets in the borough, in the city of Borough.
Says here on the bottom of the Lincoln Streets improvement cover sheet, scope direction is not well defined and will be developed through the Safe Streets grant planning process. So that is.
Our next item is adding some funding to the Wachusett Storm Drain Project. We have had some grant funding. You'll also see, last year we put 580,000 in contingent grants. We've gotten I think it was 807 in. So we need to add some grant funding there, but we also need a bit more working capital. As they've gotten into that project, they've found some items that are going to cost a bit more. So just wanted to bring your attention to that. It sounds like that construction will be happening summerish of 2026, but we need to get all the funding in line for that. And the next two items were ones that we reviewed, but we didn't feel at this point should go into this budget. So we both are for temporary wages. One is for the building maintenance fund and tied to the school maintenance, particularly kind of doing extra during the summer. Just the increase to $60,000 we felt would be a bit of a stretch to the already significant increase in funding for schools that we incurred this year. So that one was not recommended, and the same for the central garage. Kind of the guidance that we've given the staff there is, let's start with a smaller amount here, something that's not as significant of a change. So it's not to say that Connor can't have temp wages, just this level is high. And the same with central garage. So temporary workers, seasonal workers, again, can be super, super valuable. But the level of these requests, the review team was not comfortable with.
Great, thank you. I have a overarching comment on goal 4, and then we'll take a break before we go into goal 5, if anyone has things on goal 4 as well. But John, question for you. So I counted 5 vehicles in goal 4. One of those, I understand why there's no sinking fund for replacing the Sitka School District vehicle. That one's easy. So out of those 4 vehicles that are normal and have sinking funds, 3 of them are not fully funded from our sinking fund. Is it time to review our policies on that and plus those up so that we actually have a correct sinking fund by the time the vehicle is due for replacement?
I'm the one who's been working on this spreadsheet. And we saw kind of right after COVID, as we saw those costs go up, we saw almost a 40% increase. And so the decision was made to work toward getting the sinking funds whole, but those vehicles that were closer to replacement already. So hopefully the ones that still have a few more years, by the time they come to you, we won't have to be asking for more funding. But really, that the goal there was to ease that increase in. So that's really what's happening here. And the impact on the general fund would have been to kind of get us whole in 1 year would have been really painful. So, we're still working on that, and that'll be part of what goes into our model.
So then
for
any
this
new
year.
vehicle bought should have a complete sinking fund for the replacement of its base asset and accessories, or just base asset?
No, base asset and accessories, assuming a reasonable, because we factor in annual inflation, but.
So then if we look
sometimes-
at the one we're buying for school district maintenance, we're significantly short on that already for what's being proposed in this resource proposal. It's proposing about $3,700 annually on the cost of the vehicle and accessories, divided out over 15 years is about $5,700.
Yeah, I'll run all of those. I didn't review the sinking fund numbers here, but those all go into a formula in the actual central garage. So
Okay, that's pretty important to me as we
Yes.
go forward, that those numbers match the actual cost of the asset. Anything else overriding on goal 4? Before we take a break, please.
The Crescent Park courts resurfacing, is that not happening this year?
I believe we have that appropriated. That was appropriated as a supplemental with that grant. I think we're still working on executing that grant. There's a few kind of items that need negotiation there. So that I don't know the timing right now because we don't know exactly when the funding is going to be available.
Thank you.
All right, see nothing else. We'll take a brief recess. Assembly, please be seated when you're ready to continue. My office is full.
Before you eat them all.
All right, thank you, everybody. That'll bring us moving into goal 5 related items. Melissa?
All right, so we have just a few goals or a few items under goal 5, which is service. And the first one is additional pool staffing, and this is really around expanding the programs for the pool. So there would be some level of revenue coming in. We haven't operated the pool long enough to really know kind of how we are in terms of break even there. So that'll be an area that I'll be digging into as we get a little further. The pool really hasn't been operating long, so it's hard to get a good picture on that. And then the next item, it's hitting the library budget. And it is just restructuring right now. If you look at the FY25 staffing table, you see like 0.47 FTE, whatever. It's extremely hard to manage. It's hard for payroll to manage. It's hard for HR to manage. It's hard for the library to manage. So this is really simplifying that. Where the cost comes in is that there's, that slight increase in FTE. And the idea is to make one of these part-time positions a full-time position, and then make the others, instead of 0.47 or whatever that is, just a simple half-time position. So where the majority of the potential cost comes from is the potential that as a full-time employee, there's a lot less that you have to pay for a health insurance plan. This assumes worst case scenario where an employee would select a family health plan.
Best case scenario, because then they have kids in the school
Well, there
district.
you go. So I shouldn't say worst case scenario. I should say most expensive scenario. So our next item is really around digging in and creating templates for our contracting. We have we certainly have templates, but they really could use some work. This one would be led by our compliance officer and our procurement team, but would certainly involve other departments in the city, and would also, that cost would be split. So it'd really be about creating templates for all of the different kind of contracts we use, and also training staff up on procurement. And just making sure that we're getting, I guess, the best value for every dollar we spend.
I'm going to jump in on this one and offer a little bit of explanation. I mentioned a while ago in front of the assembly that I wanted to transition to firm fixed price contracting. If anybody is not familiar with that, that essentially means we design a project, let's say it's a construction project. We put it out to bid for a firm fixed price. And that means the bidder gives us the price, and there are no over and above, there are no change orders. The price is the price. So if the contractor gets the job done earlier and at a lower cost on their end, meeting the requirements of the contract, that's their incentive to perform better. They make more profit, and it basically sheds all the risk off of the city and puts the risk on the contractor. Now, the contract, the bids may ultimately come back higher than you would if it were not a firm fixed price contract. But in my years of doing this in the federal world too, I've found that usually when you have change orders and over and aboves on your traditional type contracting, it usually ends up being more than the firm fixed price contract. But shifting to that, a lot of staff have not had training on that. I've reached into my federal backgrounds and looked at the Federal Acquisition Institute, the Defense Acquisition University, places that I went to train for these things, and they will not offer those courses to municipal governments. The state has some training out there, and there are some private organizations like Management Concepts is one of the big ones, and I believe they have a branch in Anchorage. But I'd like to get that training for staff, and through that training, they can get templates on how to start writing these contracts and kind of shift the way we fund some of these projects.
So if training isn't widely available, does that mean that this process isn't widely used in municipal governments and we're kind of going to single ourselves out?
I don't think so. It's hit or miss. I know that, for example, the seaplane base, when we were talking to the feds on the seaplane base, one of the questions they asked us is, do you do firm fixed price contracting? Because we really like that. There are municipalities that do it, and like I said, the training is available, but not as readily available as it was in the federal world. I don't think we'd be singling ourselves out, and even if we were, by saying this is hard and fast what we're going to do from now on, there's nothing stopping us from going back to a traditional time and materials or a design build type contracting. We can really choose any type of contracting strategy we want, but I'd really like to make an effort to go to as much firm fixed price contracting as we can.
Yeah, and I appreciate your desire to keep our costs as stable as possible. I think we've seen that with our airport remodel right now, where our costs are substantially higher than we anticipated. I just want to make sure that we're not becoming the only guy in the state that does this and reduces our pool of available contractors down to a point where no one is able to do the work anymore.
All right, and then the last item for tonight was one that was not recommended. It was a drone for the fire department. I believe right now, there are people in town that you can contract out to. One area of concern for this is that if the city is to own a drone, it really adds on a lot of insurance complexity and cost. So this is the cost to buy the drone. We don't know. There's a whole sheet in our insurance application that you have to fill out if you have a municipally owned drone. So this one. No helicopters either.
Well, Chief, I was going to say that'd be a great thing for your volunteer association, but it sounds like it's not that we don't want to buy you a drone. We just don't want to own a drone at this point. So
The military's having really hard times trying to find kids for crashing their drones. So a lot of kids are getting away from operating drones until the military has a different responsibility aspect. And when I was reading in there, and it's like dam inspection, would that be like an underwater deal? Because then if we're not going to cycle the Howell Bunger valve because we raised turbidity, it'd be a good idea to get a drone out there. And
You will see with the electric fund, there will be an underwater, it's an ROV. I don't know what that stands for, but it's an ROV. And that is basically an underwater little robot. And that will be owned by electric. But right now, the way it happens, it's owned by electric. I believe the fire department is the one that operates it. They use it and electric uses it, and there will be internal jobbing since the electric fund can't support the general fund. So you will see that coming forward.
And there's a lot of drones can get very complicated too. I mean, just besides the owning the asset, there's licensure, there's recurring training, there's where it can fly, where it can't fly. Can it go near high value assets? A hydro facility would probably be considered a high value asset, would be considered a high value asset. And, you've got airspace restrictions. You would need a pilot to operate it.
Okay, so are there any concerns about these as presented?
I guess I was confused. The electric department's gonna ask for one and then the fire hall wanted this one? Is that what you were saying?
The electric department one is for in water, not air.
Does the fire department already have one for in-water?
I believe it's owned by the electric department. They have one, that they use. No, you own it? Okay. Well, so they own it, but theirs is, it's pretty end of life is my understanding.
Just make a general comment about this. I wanted to digest this at this point and, you know, I read through it as much as I could, but so I'm not going to be making any suggestions at this point, but that I, when I digest it, and I suspect others are the same way, that there'll probably be other people coming forward with some suggestions down the road.
That's exactly where I'm at tonight as well. Staff, if I've asked questions that put you on the spot, I apologize. My intent would have been to come earlier with something to meet with you about and talk about it offline, get some answers that I needed instead of just jumping on it here. Doesn't mean I won't come forward later with some questions about your resource proposals, just to make sure that I have a thorough understanding as this budget process moves forward. Definitely want to see how these play into the overall numbers as well and see what this all does, but it gives me an idea of what we're looking at coming forward.
I'm pretty much the same. We always seem to keep most of them in at the very beginning, and then after we've thought about it and seen how it affects the budget, then we start taking things off that needed to be.
All right. So we'll put these into our initial budget, kind of our next internal steps throughout this month. We will be meeting with all of the department heads to kind of comb through all of their budgets. And then these will all come together in the draft budget for the general fund. I'm aiming to send that out to the assembly around February 7th. So you'll have plenty of time to look at that. We'll discuss it on the 27th. And then next Thursday, we kind of have our next big piece of the budget that will guide us, and that's the discussion about school funding, since that is such a significant piece. So
Thank you for all your work, you and your team for putting that together. John, you as well.
Can we talk about possibly rescheduling the January 30th meeting?
Yeah, that's right. You had mentioned that a bunch of us will be gone on the 30th. This timeline has been set by staff, so I have no problem rescheduling it due to multiple assembly members being gone. It's kind of your flexible scheduling process, so let's go ahead and do it.
okay, is there any preference between that Tuesday or Thursday?
So it'd be February 4th or February 6th.
I'm looking for myself, if anybody else has anything else. I'm gone for both of them, so it doesn't matter.
I'm okay with either.
All right. Melissa and I will regroup and then we'll let you know.
Great. Thank you for reminding us of that. Unless anything else on item A at this point?
No.
Great, thank you. As you'll see on all of our budgetary meetings, we have this item on here tonight, item B, but a discussion direction for anything in the budget. I think right now would be a good opportunity if there's things on assembly members' minds, if they didn't submit a resource proposal or there's something they want to talk more about, this would be an opportune time. This item will come up every single time. So if we have anything about the budget, we have the ability to speak on it. Scotty?
Is Price Street and Smith Street on the list for getting paved?
So I did ask that question. It is on the list, but not for this year. The risk matrix has scored some other ones higher than that one, but it is in the queue.
Thank you.
I guess kind of going off of that, when would it become, up for repaving? or what are other options that could be available to the residents?
I don't know when it's up, but the other option, most definitely, and I wanted to compile some information about this because it seems like the neighborhood is interested in a paving project. But we do have a local improvement district program. There is money sitting in a pot for a guarantee on one of those right now. So if the residents of that area are interested in getting paving done, they can actually do it on their own accord with our LID program. But John, do you have an idea of when that was on the docket? I don't know.
I don't have the capital list with me, and JJ probably has it in front of her.
Hey, friends. Price Street 2025, but it's in the deferred column. It was unfunded, so it was 100,000 that we did not fund previously. It would have been right about now.
So 100,000 sounds as we're putting a chunk into it. Looking at some of the prices for some of the other streets, I can assume we're in the 10 million range to get all that done. Maybe less because there's no electrical work, but just chipping away at it.
And I'd also point out that that does not, that would only be, that's not paving anything new. So that would probably be paving where there is pavement, is what's in there. Right now, our projections really, anything that's gravel now, we do not have plans. We're already over 4 million a year, just keeping up with the paved roads we have and not transitioning any that are currently gravel to pavement.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw all those emails too, and that's an LID issue. I mean, that is classic LID, is that, you know, the city doesn't build new streets, but once they're built, that we take ownership and are willing to keep them up. And so repaving is one thing, but starting out fresh paving, that would be an LID. And I was, you know, I've had to, you know, my family's had to be involved with them, and that's how you get stuff built. And it's, you know, initial stuff. And that's what that would be. I mean, in a perfect world, the contractor who built the subdivision would have done that, but it didn't. And so I don't think, you know, I think the possibility of trying to throw a little in trying to make the hit, not quite so hard, I could see, but not taking over the whole project, because that's what LIDs are for.
You know, I think this is worth mentioning. One of the things we discussed at some of the asset management sessions at the last AML conference is some people frankly don't like asset management because it's more of a calculated approach, right? It's what are the highest risk things? What is the most value at that time? So they tend to hear no a lot in asset management. So changing that narrative from no because to yes if seems to be a little more helpful. And by yes if, I mean, can we pave Price and Jarvis? Well, yes if we adjust the rest of that capital list. So some decisions would have to be made if that were to be taken on. Which things do we want to knock off of the priority list to get to the other ones?
And then the Georgeson Loop residents that have been gravel for 30 plus years are really going to blow us up too on that one.
No, go ahead.
Not road related, well, kind of road related. A mini project I've been thinking about for a bit. There's a spelling error on one of our street signs. And if that needs to get mentioned here, or if that's just something streets can take care of. Cogwanton on the Catley Street sign is just inaccurate. So if that's an appropriation of $500 or $1,000 or whatever, work can be done in-house, I think that is time for that one to get updated.
I'd like to get that crosswalk painted right by that sign.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if this is the appropriate place to talk about this, but I'm happy with the meeting. I'm happy with the current plan. There is a ballot prop that may be coming up that could have a big effect on the budget. I don't know. Do we have a plan? Are we going to plan for if it passes or if it fails? Are we just going to go forward and plan a budget, assuming that it will not pass? And there's a lot of big financial changes that could happen. I have an opinion about that, but I'm not going to say it right now. But it's been very, I've just been wondering, I've been pondering how we're going to plan a budget when a decision made by people of Sitka could have adverse effects on our budget. Are we going to talk about that, or are we going to plan for if it passes, or are we going to plan for if it fails, or do we have ability to do it both ways? Any thoughts? Melissa?
So, for me, I tend to want to take the approach of, yeah, I think you all know I prefer a conservative budget. I think this year for me, a conservative budget is a bit more scary than it's been in recent years, because, and it's honestly, it's much harder because it's really hard to know what that impact would have, kind of in my preliminary numbers. And I'm just, I'm still waiting for kind of more sales tax from the last quarter to come in to really kind of help develop those. But at least going back to 2022, it's a pretty significant drop in revenue. So
You're saying if it passes, it would be a significant drop in revenue?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think there's two levels. We do have reserves. We've been very careful with our reserves. It's not going to be the end of the world short term if we end up with a budget that, essentially ends up being a deficit budget. But we can't continue that. So it would be at some level irresponsible to be making decisions today for expenses that might continue or, have future impacts. And so I think there's a lot of unknowns. It's going to be, there always are, but I think it's even more so this year.
Thank you.
I think that's been part of it for me on these resource proposals is I didn't see any that were necessarily long-term continuing. If we were talking about taking over the maintenance of the school district this year, I would perhaps have a different stance on it because that's a long-term continuing program. But a lot of these are shorter term, potentially can be cut on the spot if we determine it to be necessary. I share your concern about the variability of revenue because I think it's an unknown. But I also hate to diminish services, and whether that's pothole repair or what, at this point. I think we need to continue forward with some reasonable expectations of what a revenue would be and look at it that way, knowing that if we do go forward and we have to make some changes rapidly, we can do that later down the road. So that's my take on it anyway.
Yeah.
But I share your concern of the unknown of revenue continuing forward in the future. It's something that we may have to deal with. And if that's the case, then that's what we'll do. So
you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, best to just kind of run a conservative budget, but not assume that passes because we don't know what the change is. And then if it does pass, we'll have to make adjustments at that point.
I don't know if that's best way to do it, but that's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
Okay. John seems to have something to say.
Yeah, I think we have options as Melissa stated, we have some healthy reserves, but that's not always the case and you can't run a deficit budget. Probably do it once, but probably, not for a long-term scenario. I think you probably remember back in the COVID year, the desire was to maintain level of services And we knew that revenues were going to decrease. And the way we solved at that time was we just canceled all general fund funded projects for the year to help us maintain that level of service, but knowing that it was going to be coming back. So there will be some options, but the best answer is that we'll just have to watch and see and then adjust accordingly.
Thank you.
I think it would be helpful for me to know in a general sense what the assembly would like to see in the revenue side budget for that initial draft. If you want me to assume, like I said, for July through September of this year, that first fiscal quarter, I'm not assuming any changes. I'll be looking at existing trends there, but that April to June period is really the critical one. If you want, and I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the impact would be if the ballot measure does pass. But I can either make my best guess at that, or I can keep it pretty status quo. And it would be helpful to know what the assembly would like to see there.
Scott, I'm just trying to catch up. Is it, so the surplus that you put into this year's budget of last year, you're talking about sales tax from Love Boat people is what Kevin's.
I'm talking about there's a ballot measure that could come to the voters in October. And if that passes, our revenue would significantly decrease. Therefore, I think the conversation as I perceive it right now is, do we want to plan as if it's not going to pass and status quo, or if it does pass, make adjustments? I've been going back and forth. In my mind, I've been waiting for this meeting to see what people's minds would be.
I think the answer for me is, nothing has happened yet. So build your budget as if from where we are today. And, we will cross those bridges if and when we ever even get to them. So, because who knows what the impacts of it is going to end up being regardless. So, we don't know what our revenue is going to be. So, let's just plan it as we usually do. We do have good reserves and, we can weather a brief period and we can make adjustments as we go. So I would encourage us to not plan for something that may or may never happen.
I hate to go against what you say there, Tim, but just kind of with what my industry is going through right now is, we're in kind of hard times. So you have to plan for worst case scenarios. Trying to do that, not really overly successful. But I feel like we kind of need to do that as well. Obviously, this initiative passing is definitely an option. And I feel like we need to plan for if it does pass, because it is an option. And that's kind of the scary part for me is there's a lot of unknowns with that. We don't truly have the nailed down data to say what sort of revenue losses we may see, if any. So that for me is a little bit scary. I know I've been trying to think about how I want to go into this budget season here. I know initially it was instantly no new FTEs. And I was really happy to basically only see a partial FTE. So that's something I can get behind. So, but I know personally, I want to be extremely conservative. I've already kind of marked up my pages here of what I may want to see cut and what I definitely want to see staying. For me, I know anything service-wise, if it's to, provide services, that's something I want to see continued. If it's something that is maybe a little more of a want rather than a need, it's cut in my mind. I mean, we can all argue about it later. This meeting, I didn't really want to go there. I would like to see a surplus and put that surplus towards reserves and dedicate that towards, if this passes, it'll give us a little bit of time to see what happens with our revenue, because we don't know. We've done a lot of spending here the last couple of years, taking on maintenance, taking on the pool, starting the Parks and Rec program. I don't want to lose those. And I would like to have a reserve buffer in place that if we do see some dramatic revenue decreases, that we can keep those programs going and try to figure out how we're going to keep them going into the future with a potential decrease in revenue. So that's kind of my plan, I guess, as we move forward. You know, any cuts I may make, it's nothing personal. It is strictly, I'm wanting to hold on. You know, the two aquaculture associations I belong to, we have massive reserves, 2 years operating in both of these organizations. And it is a really nice safety net when you are experiencing some unprecedented times. Fishing, we experience that often. So that's why our reserves are so large. You know, I'm not saying we need to put 2 years of operating here. But it would be nice, I think, to really try to bolster it up as much as we can so we can see what is going to happen in the future here. You know, we may have our answer shortly. I don't know, but at this point, I want to be extremely conservative moving forward, but that's how I feel, so.
On that front, I'm gonna, similar to what Tim said, but with a little twist. First of all, that's what as situations go, budget adjustments, we've all done them. We will continue to do them, and we can do them. And I guess I would bring back what happened with COVID, where John said, "Oh, we're gonna not have money," and he made some changes right away and then brought them to us to make those adjustments, and we can do that. And so I think it's important to remember that a budget is not a death pact. I mean, it is an estimate how much things are gonna cost, an estimate on how much money you're gonna put forward. We've gotten really spoiled because we get really good estimates. Thank you, Melissa. And it's a living document. It's something that can and should be and will be changed during the year. And so I'm not going to panic. Although I think there's a lot of unknowns if it passes. It could be much worse. And then we think if, you know, we could wipe out cruise ship docking because they won't want to mess with the scheduling system. Or maybe it won't make any difference at all. Maybe people will have more time to spend money because there's not as many people in their way. I don't know. And I think it's kind of fruitless to try. I think we budget as if a normal, with the full understanding that we can and will change it if necessary, both ways, you know.
I'm a hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of person. I think that is just something I've lived my life by. And I've heard of a supplemental appropriation. I'm not familiar with the supplemental depropriation. I don't think it works that way, or it can possibly. Melissa's nodding. It's something we can do, but maybe it's not something we should choose to do because that's just, yeah, no, thank you.
So if you don't mind, after listening to everyone's comments and then listening to Melissa a little bit, what I want to do, because I'm very concerned about this, I would say a little scared about, I don't want to lose any of our services that we have now, especially the things we've added, like school maintenance and sustainability coordinator, Parks and Rec. I want to keep those things. So I think what I would like to do is run more of a conservative budget this year, but not plan for those major cuts, not assume that the thing will pass. We do have, I wouldn't have said that if I hadn't heard, if I didn't know we had some reserves and some of the nuances that Melissa talked about. I think we could weather it in the near term. And then if it passes, we'll have to get more information and make decisions then. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts. I was really wanting to know what everyone thought. And so I think I'm gonna lean more towards what Stephen and Tim and Tor are thinking.
Yeah, Chris, when you started talking, I thought that our points of view were going to be slightly different on this budget. And I actually think they align very closely, and it's just two different methods to get there. I think you have an extremely good point about fishing and the potential outfalls on boat owners not being able to do as much maintenance or buy as much fuel and not have enough, not as much revenue. So I think that's a very good point. I want to look at this as core services stay and other things are going to have a lot more scrutiny this year. When we consider this, when we look at where it's been talked about that revenues may drop, that would be in the May timeframe. So that gives us 2 to 3 months out of this year's budget where we may have decreased revenues. I don't want to reduce programming and staff right now to get to those couple months where we may have to be a little bit lower. Cutting a pothole filling program and then bringing it back is a lot harder than just continuing with that program and trying to rehire or whatever that we would do on that. So I think we could weather the storm if necessary for April, May, June, and continue some programming right now. But I agree, anything that's not core probably needs a very hard look at it this year in order to put ourselves in the best position possible.
This is such a process, to see staff maybe need to do that twice. I don't want to put that strain on our workforce here, because so if we mention it now, guys, to kind of know where your core services are and where your little bits of extras are, please identify that, because if we need to go to that place, we don't want to see another 6-month process of 12 meetings to get to that point.
So I think to kind of summarize what I'm hearing, and just let me know if I'm way off base. I think from the majority of what I'm hearing, kind of not necessarily assume this passes, keep the budget conservative. But then I can do some sensitivity analysis, and so I can kind of show the assembly the budget would be prepared with a conservative status quo budget. But I can do sensitivity analysis that will let you see if revenue falls by $1 million, this is what our bottom line would look like, or 2 million, or I can provide that if that sounds reasonable.
Yes, very much so. And I appreciate you saying what the bottom line would look like, not programs and services, because I think that comes back on us, and that's an if we need to. So just knowing what the potential bottom line could be so that we're prepared for all situations would be great. Anything to add to that from the assembly? But I think you captured it very well. I think your understanding is our guidance at this point. Anything else on the municipal budget as a whole this evening? Please.
Add in a quick thing. I didn't make a resource proposal, but thinking about, our emphasis on training and service as our 5th goal. CBS is recognized as being a great place to work and excellent service provider to the community. We talked in the past, and I think it was in the last one, but we didn't make it to this draft. The idea of health and safety and some safety training, and that culture of safety for our employees. We do a lot of stuff. We're not just all desk workers, navigating contracts. There are, people cutting trees and opening streets and, doing repairs. So to provide some, safety program above what we're currently doing is always a need. And I don't know if it's 5,000, 1,000, 10,000, but putting some more resources towards a safety program.
One item I would like to point out is our insurance provider, which is Alaska Public Entity Insurance. They're actually transitioning to be the Alaska Public Risk Alliance. They're combining with the other one in the state. So they have a ton of free training resources, and we can very likely reach out to them. They will tailor a safety training for our staff at no cost.
Sounds like a deal.
We also, with the kickoff of our HRIS system, we purchased essentially all of the modules available under NeoGov. I don't remember which one it's called, Insight or whichever one, but there's a training program in there. And as we build out everybody's profiles in NeoGov, we can start to assign specific training that is available in that portal to employees and check their compliance on completing those training modules. So that is in the works right now.
It's not always just the resources program, but it's that staff time to set aside to do it and to fit it into a schedule. That is often the key to it. Thank you.
Anything else on the 26 budget? All right, seeing none, that'll wrap up item B this evening. Then that'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Good evening. My name is Austin Cranford. I know there was a lot of talk during the budget meeting of planning for a conservative budget. In fact, on one of the slides, the arrow slide specifically, it mentioned the leveling out of the budget for July to September 2025, but April, June of 2026. The assumption is a contraction. I would like to point out that the UN put out their projections for 2025. The global economy is only expected to grow just over 3%. The U.S. economy is expected to slow from 2.8% to 1.9%. With that being said, the Federal Reserve 10-year Treasury constant maturity minus 2-year Treasury constant maturity, which has successfully predicted almost every recession to the end of time, inversed on August 30th of 2024. The inversion of that chart, normally within 6 to 18 months of that inversion, a recession happens, which puts us right on track because as of Wednesday, January 8th, 2025, we are 0.39 above that curve. So I agree with the very conservative estimate, as not only is there the petition that is ongoing, there are several macroeconomic and external factors that the city cannot plan for. There's also talks of the tariffs, which will force the Fed to raise rates to combat inflation, since tariffs are inflationary by design, which turns into a whole other mess. So I hope the Assembly keeps a very close eye on the global and national economy when they do their budget. Thank you.
My name is Claudia Lassess, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody besides myself right now, because I didn't have time for a board meeting when I saw tonight's agenda in the newspaper. So I did send you all a copy of this graph that you can look at. It does reflect that sales tax revenue is not necessarily correlated to cruise visitation. So I think it would be helpful for us all to realize that there's a lot of value in independent travelers and those folks who bring in money by virtue of using hotels and bed and breakfasts and car rentals and things like that. And realize that we are, I, as an individual, am very supportive of cruise tourism. And I think that we have a lot to gain by having them continue, just not at the levels that we have to close our streets and have bathrooms downtown. So those are things that I think are critical for who knows how many people in town will find out. We hope to find out by virtue of a vote. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of benefit to diversity in our economy. And so we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket and have just one thing that we count on. We found years ago that when we had the timber industry being the huge thing, that it was very scary when they started to decide that they weren't making enough money and they had to close down. It wasn't because of anybody doing any one thing that caused them to close down. It was because they weren't making enough money. And that could happen with any given economy, particularly if we have only one voice of economy, one place where we put all of our eggs. So let's just be thoughtful, and hopefully we'll win the prize and have a good, diverse economy, and hopefully we'll have a vote that will be positive towards keeping our economy strong, and so on and so forth. So thank you all. Appreciate all that you do.
Anybody else this evening under persons to be heard? Any item on or off tonight's agenda? Seeing none, that concludes our business this evening. We would move for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Thank you all for your time, staff who came out this evening. I appreciate you being here.
That's a one. But it's still.
Are you gonna be in?
Where is this?
Nice to meet you. Hey, Melissa. I feel like you have clear direction from this conversation.
That's what I need to get in together.
Like, I can't imagine looking at a budget with just essential services. There wasn't a vote on it, no? Right. But is that what you're saying?